Okay. In this goaltending series, I knew Boston was going to be pretty good, kind of. They did go through their era where goaltending was shaky, but for the most part, Boston's had some pretty good goaltenders. Going back to 67, 68. Remember, for this series, it starts in 1967 with the original expansion. And it's Cheevers and Eddie Johnston. 68, 69, same. 69, 70, same. 70, 71, same. 71, 72, same. Reason being, when you win 2 Stanley Cups in 5 years, it's a good idea to just keep those goaltenders together. 72, 73, Johnston plays 45 games. So Cheevers ends up leaving Boston for greener pastures, but he'll be back. 73, 74, Gilles Gilbert and Brooks are your goalies. Gilles Gilbert plays 53 games in 74, 75, and the backups did not reach 20 games that year. 75, 76, Gilbert plays 55 games that year, and same, none of his backups reached 20 games. 76, 77, it's Gerry Cheevers back in the catbird seat, with Gilles Gilbert as the backup. 77, 78, Graham, Gilbert, and Cheevers are your goaltenders. So again, Cheevers is on the board. That is, a sign of just how good he was for how long. 67, 68, 77, 78. 78, 79, Cheevers is the starter again, with Gilbert as the backup. Cheevers is the starter in 79, 80. Gilbert is the backup. And then Cheevers hangs him up. 80, 81, Rogie Vachon comes in from LA. And Jim Craig's the backup. So Jim Craig gets on the board. 81, 82, Marco Barron is the starter and Rogie Vachon the backup. Marco Barron is one of the great goalie names. Really is. And I'm glad he's on the board again. I think he was on the board for the Kings as well. 82, 83, Pete Peters had that amazing season, 62 games played. He was fantastic that year, and there was a lot of talk about whether or not he could get the Bruins to the Cup. Spoiler alert, he didn't. 83, 84, it's Peters and Keens. Keens actually played for quite a while. He was their backup for 5 seasons. Backs up Peters again in 84, 85, and backs up Pat Riggin in 85, 86. Pat Riggin has shown up on this board for Washington as well, and shows up here, and one of my favorite goalies at the time. 86, 87, Bill Ranford. This young kid Ranford, we'll see if he becomes anything. He does, but not for Boston. And Keens is the backup there. Keens is then the backup for Lemelin in 87, 88. Towards the end of that season, they added Andy Moog. Moog only played 6 games, though, so he doesn't get on the board. So 88, 89, it's Moog and Lemelin. And that's the tandem they stay with for 89, 90 and 90, 91. So this is a nice solid tandem. In 91, 92, Andy Moog plays 62 games that year. No backup reaches 20 games. So it's the end of the road for Reggie Lemelin, and that left kind of a hole for Boston. 92, 93, Moog is the starter. John Blue gets into 20-plus games that year, so he officially gets on the board. And then things kind of change. So Moog ends up going to Dallas, and John Casey comes in from Dallas. Casey plays 57 games that following season, and no backup gets into 20 games. John Casey, not fantastic, so he ends up being moved on from as well. 94, 95, Blaine Locker. Yeah, that's right, the Loch Ness Monster. He comes in, plays 35 games, kind of becomes a phenom, and burns out quickly. Mid-90s, you went through goalies like him and Jim Carey. They would just come in, ball of fire, they were fantastic, and then gone. 95, 96, you'll notice Locker is not on the board. It's Ranford again. Ranford came back from Edmonton. He won something in Edmonton. And then Craig Billington's the backup. So Boston pretty quickly in 95, 96 realizes we can't go with Locker. 96, 97, Ranford's the starter again with Tallis as the backup. And then 97, 98, Byron Dafoe comes in. And Dafoe, Lord Byron, as it was said on his helmet, was kind of a fun goalie. 65 games played in 97, 98, 68 games played in 98, 99, and no backup got into 20 games. So Boston, pretty solid, and they stuck with starters pretty well. Tallis is the backup to Dafoe in 99, 2000, so Robbie Tallis gets into 20-plus games twice. And, had a decent little career for himself. And there's John Graham. And, of course, Graham is going to end up being known if you were around back then, he's kind of known for John Tortorella talking at a press conference about how Graham's a nice guy. He likes Johnny, but he's not convinced that he's a starter. And I don't know that you come back from that. Your coach going, nice guy, not really a great goalie though. 2000, 2001, and I thought Graham was a solid goaltender. I knew he had a bad year that year, but I thought he was solid. 2000, 2001 is Defoe, and there's Skudra. So Skudra was on the board for the Canucks, now on the board for the Bruins. Defoe plays 64 games in 2001, 2002. So Byron Defoe actually plays starter minutes for Boston for 5 years and has one of the nicest masks ever in NHL history. Steve Shields came in 02-03 when they knew they needed a new goalie with Graham as the backup. And I was never a fan of the Steve Shields experiment because he'd never been a starter. And I was nervous about him being a starter. And then my nerves were pretty well founded by the results. And obviously, Boston wasn't overly enamored either because the following season, this Raycroft came in out of nowhere and got himself the starter job. And Felix Potvin is the one that played backup for Boston that year. So Felix, who was on the board for Vancouver, and now he's on the board for Boston. So again, when you look at my favorite teams being Vancouver, Boston, and Dallas, you're going to see goaltenders went between those teams a lot. And still do. Hudobin just did it going to Dallas this year. In 2005, 2006, Thomas gets the starter minutes because of injuries to Raycroft and Toivonen. And Raycroft and Toivonen get the 20 games. But Toivonen was supposed to be the starter. He was supposed to be the guy. And then it just didn't work out that way. 2006, 2007, Tim Thomas was 66 games played. And he's the only one to 20. 2007, 2008, Tim Thomas and Alex Auld are your goaltenders. So Alex Auld played for all three. He played for Vancouver, Dallas, and Boston, and technically also played for Ottawa, meaning my four favorite teams all at one point in time or another had Alex Auld on them. 08-09, Tim Thomas is the starter with this guy Fernandez as the backup. And Fernandez was supposed to be the starter. So again, Thomas comes through and plays pretty well and is rewarded by them bringing in Fernandez in a trade with Minnesota. 09-10, after Fernandez's time in Boston's up, Tuukka Rask comes in and is the starter and Thomas the backup. Tuukka, this is the start of a long run for Tuukka. 2011, 2012, Thomas and Rask. 2012, 2013, Rask and Hudobin. Why Rask and Hudobin? Thomas doesn't play enough games that year. 13-14, it's Rask and Johnson. And yeah, again, Thomas is out. And when you're going, wait, what do you mean he didn't play enough games in 12-13? He actually left the team. That's a nice way of saying it. It's a nice way of saying he took the year off. And then the following season, he's not on the team either. And Chad Johnson was decent as a backup that year. 2014-15, and Johnson's been through a number of teams. Let's just throw that out there, a number. 2014-15, Tuukka Rask plays 70 games, and he's the only one to get 20 games that year. 2015-16, Rask and Gustafsson are your goalies. 2016-17, Tuukka Rask, 65 games played. He's the only one to reach 20. And 17-18, it's Tuukka Rask and Anton Hudobin, who comes back and plays well enough that they let him go again as a free agent. And Yarrow Halak will probably get on this board this year once he's played that 20th game. But let's take a look at it. Your tandems, Cheevers and Johnston, 5 years. Cheevers and Gilbert, 3 years. So Cheevers keeps stability in this net while he's there. Moog and Lemelin, 3 years. It felt like longer, though. I know when I was looking at this, when I set this up last night, I thought, it felt like it was longer that Moog and Lemelin were the goalies in Boston. It really did. It felt like they were a tandem for at least 4 or 5 years. So 3 years kind of, I don't know, I thought it was more. Thomas and Rask were the tandem for 3 years, and it would have been more other than Thomas deciding he's going to go walk the earth. Gerry Cheevers plays 9 years in Boston of 20 games or more. Eddie Johnson, 6. Gilles Gilbert, 7. Peters only there for 3. So he has that fantastic year, but he doesn't stay in Boston for very long. Andy Moog, 5 years. And again, it felt like Moog was there longer than 5 years. Lemelin, 4. Defoe, 5. Thomas, 6. Tuukka Rask, 9. And while we're being technical, Doug Keynes with 5, which is pretty solid for a backup goaltender that was never really a starter. 32 goalies used by Boston, which is not a lot compared to a lot of other teams, but they've used 15 since 2000. So since the 99-2000 season, Boston has had its share of turnover, and there's going to be at least one new goalie on the board this year. And unless something crazy happens, Rask will hit that 10th season and likely the 11th next year as well. So there you go. The Boston Bruins goaltending history from 1967 till 2018. And it's interesting that Rask has had as many seasons since 67-68 as Gerry Cheevers. So you don't think of Rask as being that old or that veteran, and yet he kind of sort of is. So there you go. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just hit this video, just randomly browsing around the internet. And let me know in the comments section below any thoughts you may have on the subject of Boston's goaltending, your favorites, your least favorites, stability, instability. And thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.